everyone, welcome to today's lesson. Today we'll be focusing on solving two-step inequalities. So our learning target for today is I can solve a two-step inequality, and then our second learning target is I can graph the solution of an inequality. So those are the two learning targets we'll focus on today. So when I think about solving a two-step inequality, it's kind of the same thing as solving a two-step equation, which we've done before. So if I have a two-step equation like 2x plus 5 equals 15, I know that I need to follow inverse operations to isolate the variable and get my solution. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and follow the same steps for inequalities. We just need to realize that instead of this equal sign, we have an inequality sign. So my first step that I need to follow is that I need to add or subtract the constant from both sides. And then my second step is to multiply or divide the coefficient from both sides. So those are the two steps we'll follow. Now we're just applying this to two-step inequalities. So let's say, for example, I have a two-step inequality that looks like this. I have 2x plus 1 is less than or equal to 3. So something really simple like that. So my first step is to add or subtract the constant from both sides. So I need to look for that constant. And like we said before, the constant is a number that doesn't have a variable attached to it. So if I'm looking here, I see that the 2 has an x attached to it, so that's not my constant. And then I see there's a plus 1. That's my constant. So I'm going to go ahead and put a box around that to kind of show you that constant. So this constant is saying I have a positive 1 or a plus 1. So when I'm trying to solve this, I need to use inverse operations. So if my 1 is being added, I need to do the opposite of that, okay? So like we did with two-step equations, we drew a line down the middle of the equal sign. We're going to do the same thing this time, but draw a line down the middle of the inequality sign. So since my 1 is being added, I'm going to do the opposite or the inverse of that, which is subtract 1 on both sides of my inequality. I know that plus 1 and negative 1 cancel out, those equal 0. And then I know that 3 minus 1 gives me a 2. Okay, now I bring down what's left over. And what's left over on my left side is a 2x. So I have 2x is less than or equal to 2. Okay, so I have followed my first step here. My second step is to multiply or divide the coefficient from both sides. So my coefficient is the number that's attached to my variable. So in this case, it's 2 because 2 is attached to the x. 2 is being multiplied by x. Okay, so since 2 is being multiplied by x, I'm going to do the inverse of that, which is divide by 2. So if I divide both sides by 2, 2x divided by 2 gives me 1x or an x, and then 2 divided by 2 is just 1. Okay, so now we have reached our first learning target, which is solving a two-step inequality. We've solved this two-step inequality. We got x is less than or equal to 1. This is our solution. So now that we have our solution, we can graph this on a number line. So if I have a number line that looks like this, I know that 0 is in the middle of my number line, and then I need to look for where 1 is. So I know 1 is positive, so 1 goes right there. So now let's go ahead and read what our solution says. It says that x is less than or equal to 1. Since we do have this equal right here, we know that we have to draw a closed circle on the 1. And since this is telling us that we want the values that are less than 1, we know that we need to go to the left. And then that's how graphing our solution to the inequality looks like. Okay, so that's our first example. Let's go ahead and take a look at our second example. So our second example is 5 plus 4x is less than 33. So this one looks like a little bit different than the first one. So for this example, I realized that it looks a little bit different because my variable doesn't come first. My coefficient and variables don't come in first. I see a 5, which I realize that's my constant. So let's go ahead and take a look at our constant here. Our constant is 5, which means it's a positive 5. So if I were to examine what that means, it means that 5 is being added to this side of the equation. So let's go ahead and draw our line down the middle of the inequality. And we want to go ahead and remove this 5. We want to add or subtract this 5. So since it's being added, I'm going to do the opposite, which is subtraction. I'm going to subtract 5 from this side and subtract 5 from that side of my inequality. So I know that 5 minus 5 is 0, so that's gone. And then 33 minus 5 is 28. Okay, now I bring down what's left over, which in this case I have a 4x on my left side and then a 28 right there, and my less than symbol is in the middle. Okay, so go ahead and take a minute and think about what your second step would be. All right, so we went ahead and we removed our constant. The second thing we need to do is remove our coefficient. So our coefficient here is 4. Since 4 is being multiplied by x, I need to do inverse operations, which means I have to divide both sides by 4. Now if I divide both sides by 4, I know that 4x divided by 4 is a 1, so that's 1x or just x. And then 28 divided by 4 is 7. And there I have my solution. My solution is x is less than 7. So let's go ahead and graph this. So again, we're going to draw a quick number line. 0 is in the middle, and then 7 is to the right. And then we read what this says. It says that x is less than 7. Less than 7. So I can't have it equal to 7, because obviously there's an equal sign. So that means I have to draw an open circle. And then less than 7, values that are less than 7 occur to the left of the 7. So that means I'm going to draw my line or my arrow going to the right, just like that. So that's my solution to the inequality right there. Before we move on to our last example of the day, I'm going to go ahead and discuss this new rule that comes with solving inequalities. So our rule says that when we multiply or divide by a negative number, the inequality sign flips. So what that means, if we have something like negative 2x is greater than or equal to negative 8, we know that we need to divide both sides by negative 2. And if I divide by a negative number, I need to flip my inequality sign. So this greater than or equal to sign becomes a less than or equal to sign. So that's something that we need to follow. So for this example, these cancel out and I'm left with x is less than or equal to negative 8 divided by negative 2, which is positive 4. So that's what that looks like. So that's something we need to keep in mind when we multiply or divide by a negative number. So let's go ahead and take a look at our last example for today, example number 3. So example number 3 says that I have negative 7x plus 3 is less than or equal to negative 18. Okay, so I'm going to start off by separating my two sides of that inequality. And I'm going to go ahead and look for my constant. My constant is positive 3. And I know I need to do the opposite of that, which is subtract 3. So if I subtract 3 on one side, I need to subtract 3 on the other side. So plus 3 minus 3, that cancels out, gives me a 0. On this side, I have negative 18 minus 3, which is negative 21. And then on this side, I have negative 7x. So far I haven't multiplied or divided by a negative number. But that is my next step because I look for my coefficient. My coefficient here is negative 7. Negative 7 is being multiplied by x, so I need to do the opposite, which is divide by negative 7. So if I divide both sides by negative 7, I have to apply my new rule, which means this less than and equal to symbol becomes a greater than or equal to symbol. So I have negative 7 divided by negative 7. That gives me a 1x, or just an x. And then negative 21 divided by negative 7 is a positive 3. So my answer for this inequality is x is greater than or equal to positive 3. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is I need to graph my solution. So I'm going to draw my number line. 0's in the middle, positive 3's to the right. I do see that there is an equal sign, so that means there's a closed circle. And my solution says that x is greater than or equal to 3, which means numbers that are greater than are to the right of 3. So I'm going to draw my arrow to the right, just like that. Okay, so this concludes our lesson for today. Like I said, we reviewed solving two-step inequalities, and then we graphed our solutions on the graph. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And thank you for tuning in today, and I'll see you next time.